Okay, let's do this. Hi everyone, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. I am Greg. Now, I just finished a book, and I absolutely hated it, so I'm here to talk about it. Technically, it's fine. Like, the writing is fine, the characters are fine. I can see a lot of things about this book that people might like if they were to read it. It seems like it's a very accessible kind of book. However, I thought it was extremely irritating, and at times even offensive. That book is If You Want to Make God Laugh by Bianca Marais. Now, really quickly, this is the story of three women in South Africa in the mid-1990s. Apartheid has ended, but there is still a lot of racial strife in the country, and there is a lot of violence. Nelson Mandela is elected president during the course of the plot, and the AIDS epidemic is well on its way to ravaging the people of Africa. Two of our main characters are white sisters, Ruth and Delilah. Ruth is an outspoken, devil-may-care, self-centered type with a surprisingly good heart, while Delilah is a quiet, considerate, self-sacrificing type with a surprisingly strong dose of cynicism. These sisters are estranged from each other, but they end up in their childhood home together, of course. Their lives are further interrupted by the third protagonist, Zadwa, who is a black woman living in Africa. She has been raped. She is now pregnant. Zadwa is also a lesbian in a time and a culture where homosexuality is just not acceptable. She's got a lot on her plate, obviously, and because of that, she's very conflicted about her impending motherhood. So her mother thinks that she's going to be helpful, and after the baby boy is born, the mother takes the baby, deposits it on the doorstep of Ruth and Delilah, and then conveniently drops dead. So Zadwa has absolutely no idea where her son is, if her son is alive, and she will spend a good chunk of the book looking for him. So that's the plot. Interestingly, I posted this book on Twitter as my Friday Reads, and stated this: Happy Friday Reads to a book that is determined to make me cry. If You Want to Make God Laugh by Bianca Marais, publishing July 16th. The author, Bianca Marais, promptly responded to me and said, "That's the best feedback ever, Greg. Thank you," which really confused me because that's not necessarily a compliment. And in fact, while I didn't exactly intend it as an insult, I was also definitely not intending it as a compliment. And I think that right there is indicative of the problems I have with this book. I mean, consider this. Bianca Marais thought that a book being determined to make you cry is the best feedback ever. That definitely reveals a lot about the overly melodramatic structure of this book and what Marais is trying to do by structuring it that way. Clearly, she really is determined to make you cry. Now, full disclosure, I was flustered by her mistake. I didn't want to insult her, and for some reason it didn't occur to me that I could just not respond at all. So I did respond to her and say thank you for writing the novel. I felt weird about that, so I have since deleted that comment, but, you know, it is what it is. And I further feel like a dum-dum because somebody, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who, mentioned Bianca Marais' previous book, Hum If You Don't Know the Words, in a video, and I commented to say that I was currently reading this and it was beautiful. In my defense, at the time, I did think it had potential to be beautiful because I was only about 50 to 75 pages in, and the problems I have with the book really built over time. So going back to the cry thing, it's just at every turn during the course of this book, Marais actively chooses to plot things in a way that will cause maximum emotional distress to the reader, to the point where it stops feeling like people are behaving naturally or in any way that makes sense. I honestly can't tell you the number of times when I thought to myself, why is this person reacting like that? Of course, the answer turns out to be that Marais is playing a long game with your tears. My other big complaint about this book is the chapter size. Marais uses really small, bite-sized chapters. I jokingly refer to this as the James Patterson School of Writing, and Marais is clearly a graduate of that. It's fine, that's not necessarily an insult, just like what I said on Twitter about this book was not necessarily a compliment. That is not necessarily an insult. The two things can exist in positive ways, but they can also exist in negative ways. The other part of the James Patterson School of Writing that Marais picks up is that she tends to end her books on a sort of cliffhanger. Something dramatic happens, and then the chapter's over and you go to the next one. And this is intended to lure the reader on and keep you going. And that's fine. I think the problem I have with it is that sometimes she doesn't give you the payoff right away. For instance, Zadwa in her storyline had written another character a letter. That character never got the letter. And then that character eventually, they're talking and the character reveals, I found your letter. And the chapter just ends. And then we go to somebody else's perspective, and then we go back to Zadwa, and they've met up a day or two later, she and the character who found the letter, but they haven't talked about her finding the letter or what the contents of the letter were. So I guess we're supposed to just believe that the character said, oh hey, I found that devastating letter you left for me, and then they just don't talk about it for 2 days? And even when they're back together, they're not talking about it. So, and I get what she's trying to do is lure you on so you find out, but to me it just makes no sense. Maybe it's the New Yorker in me, it's like something happens, you deal with it. And it doesn't make sense for these things to happen and then get dragged on. And it's not just the letter, it happens a lot. So for the rest of this, I don't really know how to talk about it without getting into some spoilers. So if you're interested in this book, and again, I absolutely think there are things about this book that other people would enjoy. I'm probably picking up, because again, I can't talk about the things that offended me without talking about the plot. So I may be taking some things personally, maybe I just took some irritation about the structure of the book. It's very likely that somebody could read this book and enjoy it, and I don't want to discourage anybody from reading it and potentially enjoying it because of that. If you actually want to read this book and you don't want spoilers, you can stop the video right now and just know that I didn't enjoy it at all. For those of you who want to stick around, so the baby, Mandla, ends up on Ruth and Delilah's doorstep. Ruth adopts this baby. So even though she adopts the baby never quite seems to warm up to her. She's never really satisfied as a mother because the baby's always crying. She can't seem to calm him down. At first glance, it seems like, well, I mean, motherhood is hard, and she wasn't exactly prepared for that. Cool. But then Zadwa finds out where her baby is, and she shows up at the house. They let her in, which is ridiculous because they've been having death threats, which is a whole other thing I may not have time to get into in this review, but they've been getting death threats. They put this ridiculous security system on their compound. She rings the doorbell and they just let her in. And she comes in and inexplicably the baby is choking. So and this is an example of that melodramatic plotting. It's like, well, how is this all happening at the same time? So she walks in, the baby's choking. Why is nobody watching the baby at this exact moment, by the way? So she grabs the baby, starts pounding him on the back to get him to stop choking. And Ruth is so relieved that this woman saved her baby that she offers her a job as their maid, and Zadwa takes it. And that, to me, was kind of like, why is this happening? But the payoff is that there will be more drama later by having Zadwa as a character in this house hiding the fact that she is this baby's mother than there would have been from the immediate blow up that would have happened right there. But what I'm talking about here is actually that then the baby inexplicably loves Zadwa. She turns out to be the only person who can keep the baby calm. They've been trying to teach the baby to talk. It has picked up a couple of words, but it refuses to call Ruth Mama. And it does call Zadwa Mama when there's nobody else around. And to me, the implication is that an adoptive mother is not as good as a biological mother. You can probably understand, I think, why this seems just like a really shitty thing to put in a book is that I am an adoptive / foster father. Granted, the scenario is completely different. I completely do not think it makes sense for this baby who doesn't even know its biological mother because he was taken from her immediately after being born, for him to outright reject the only maternal figures he has known and embrace his biological mother. I don't want to say it's giving a baby too much credit, but it's like, it just does not make sense. And then later in the book, when Zadwa's deception is revealed and they find out that she is the biological mother, she and Ruth are talking, and both of them agree that a baby can only have one mother, so it should be Zadwa. And this drives me insane. And again, I don't think Marais means to be offensive, but here's the thing. Again, I'm an adoptive / foster father. I have a husband. Our adoptive son has 2 fathers, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. So the idea that a baby can only have one mother or one father, ludicrous. And I get why Marais is doing it. She's forcing one of them to make a sacrifice and one of them to stake a claim to something that belongs to her in this moment of righteousness. As an adoptive father, it was kind of like, well, screw that. There's absolutely no reason they couldn't have just agreed to raise this child together. Novel idea, right? Especially since we're into spoiler territory, so the baby is HIV positive, which of course means that when Zadwa was raped, she is HIV positive. So there's every anticipation at this point that both the baby and Zadwa are doomed. And because medicine at the time was not as advanced as it is now, and especially in Africa, a lot of those medications were not available. So, assuming that this was only going to be a temporary situation in the first place, why do they have to choose a mother? It just doesn't make sense to me. Okay, and since we've gone, like, full-fledged into spoiler mode, I feel like I should go back to that security concern, because what's happening is that these brothers in the town, by the way, my dog is here to say hello, so there you go. These brothers in the town where they grew up want to buy the farm where Ruth and Delilah grew up, and where their family has lived. Delilah refuses to sell. Ruth wants to do it for the money. It turns out these guys are dangerous, white supremacists, or whatever the South African equivalent of a white supremacist would be called, and they want to buy this farm because they have all the surrounding land, and they want to build an artificial game reserve where people can go and hunt lions. So basically, every turn they are these despicable people. When Delilah and Ruth will not sell, they start threatening them, leaving dead animals on their doorstep, so they put all the security in, and that's why it seems ridiculous that somebody rings their bell and they just open the door when Zadwa shows up at their house, because basically they're afraid for their lives. Doesn't make sense for them to open the door not knowing who's on the other side. The part of the reason I really don't like that storyline is that the ending. You know what, I won't talk about the whole ending. I'm just the part that I really, really did not like, which is that there's inexplicably a happy ending, kind of ish, and part of that is that these brothers just go to jail. And yes, they break into the house earlier in the book, but they go to jail and then everything's fine. They have a lot of racist friends and a gang of people, so maybe people aren't going to do the game preserve with the lions. But it's like everything is just suddenly fine, and I don't understand it. I don't understand it. It's like, how does that just go away at the end of the novel because 2 guys go to jail? What about the rest of them? You know? I don't think I can talk about this book anymore. It really irritated me. I think it's definitely going to be a contender for my least favorite read of the year, along with Tangerine by Christine Mangan and The Age of Miracles by Karen Thompson Walker. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear it. Please tell me why you think I'm wrong about this book, why you think it's wonderful. Let's fight about it, but respectfully. Or, barring that, tell me about a book that you really disliked. I would love to hear that as well. Let's have some catharsis together. Anyway, as always, I really appreciate your time watching this video. If you've already subscribed, you're the best. If not, I hope you enjoyed this enough to follow along. I will be back, hopefully with some better reading. And until then, I hope you have some happy reading as well.